All right, y'all. So what we've done so far today, we introduced the spread of Protestantism. You've looked the idea of why Protestantism was able to spread so rapidly in the 1520s. Unfortunately, we talked about how the Swiss Reformation illustrated the division there at the Marburg Colloquy. Then we looked at the oddity of the English Reformation. The Reformation that was initiated by a political desire for a heir, Henry VIII, with the Act of Supremacy, creates a whole bunch of religious chaos that I affectionately called spiritual bipolarism that led us to Edward's radical Protestantism, followed by Mary's reactionary Catholicism. And by the time the 24 years have come to an end, really the English people don't even know, are they Catholic? Are they Protestant? What are they? Created a whole bunch of chaos. Now, outside of this chaos, we're now going to see the opposite. Calvin and what is called the Reformed tradition. The Reformed tradition is the most significant movement that really came out of the Protestant Reformation that really transformed a large portion of Catholic theology. And Calvinism is going to be a guy led by John Calvin. Here is a painting, an early painting of John Calvin. Very important guy. Young John Calvin, he became a theologian as he was graduated from the University of Paris, or at least went to the University of Paris. He went there really thinking at 14 years old. He's like, "What is truth?" He really got caught up into the disputation. He engaged in disputations and sought to understand the teachings of Luther, Zwingli, and other Protestant leaders. And really, in the outcome of that, he rejected Catholicism, despite Paris being a Catholic university. He rejected, and he barely escaped with his life. He escaped Paris as a teenager, basically got out as quickly as he could, and he barely survived. But that's going to really mark this idea of why he's so dogmatic. He really is going to reject anything Catholic, and in doing so, it's going to be in his younger days. He's barely 20 years old when he publishes the first edition of this book. It's called The Institutes of the Christian Religion. The purpose of this book was really to say, hey, kings, you should protect the Protestants. But in the end, the Institutes of the Christian Religion creates what we know as Calvinism, the Calvinist theology. This book is a well organized, systematic theology. It means it creates a system for which people should follow. It is really, I think it's a real good indication of Protestantism. It's really, and modernism, it's really about systems that are true. And the most controversial or important part of his theology is predestination. Predestination is just the idea that God chose before the creation of the earth who would go to heaven and who would go to hell. Every part of our life has been predestined, and we do not, as individuals, have free will. We are basically following the teachings of what God told us. And again, predestination is a very controversial aspect. It takes away from free will. I think Luther and Calvin, they have some nuanced differences here, where Luther would really identify the concept of individualism and the value of equality before God, where Calvin would go more towards God already knew. And the first group I want to talk about, the reprobate. The reprobate are those who are chosen to go to hell. These are people who do not profess Jesus. They're the people who don't follow the teachings of Christ. And there are the vast majority of people that live. Whereas the elect are God's chosen people. The elect, there's some verses in the Bible that he connects here. So it is interesting. If you're interested in the theological conversation, you can definitely look that out. But really, the elect, it's really about those who are saved have always been saved. And how do you know you're part of the elect? How do you know you're part of the elect? Well, first, he would argue that you would participate in the sacraments of baptism and communion. That's your first step. If you're participating in those two, you accept those two as very important. You might be part of the elect. The second part is if you live a godly life. If you flee from sin and you serve God, then you could absolutely be seen as part of the elect. The reason you choose not to sin is because God has already chosen you. It's really not a choice, it's kind of who you are. And lastly, you would have a strong work ethic. Those who work really hard to achieve their goals, clearly they're part of the elect. Now, if you think about it, you're like, well, does it mean they're like Catholics that if you do good works, you're saved? Oh, no. The only reason you do good works is because you're part of the elect. It creates this kind of a weird system in which people will do good works to prove that they elect. But again, if they're doing the works to be saved, they're clearly not the elect. And this is the most significant text in the Reformed Church. The Reformed Church in today's world, if you're a Presbyterian, you're part of the Reformed tradition. This would be something that's really important to the development of your theology. So again, the Institutes of the Christian Religion really help you understand the teachings of all aspects of Calvinism. We've identified one component, predestination. We've identified what the reprobate is. We also talk about the elect, and we talk about kind of like the spiritual test, if you will. The spiritual test, if you're part of the elect, you would participate in these sacraments, you'll live a godly life, and you would have a great work ethic. Well, as he developed this, it became a really popular book. And in the city of Geneva in Switzerland, they're like, hey, we're chaotic. We need stability. So they invited young John Calvin to become the leader. And in Geneva, he's meant to create a theocracy. A theocracy is a government led by religious leaders. So this is different than Luther. Remember, Luther believed that the government, secular leaders, should oversee the religious teachings. And this is clearly different than Catholicism that said the Pope was the head honcho, but you still have a king. For John Calvin, it's the idea that both faith and politics should be united and it should be governed through the principles of the elect. Theocracy, really important you understand that. And you might say, Wass, why would he do that? Well, one of the reasons they did that is the leaders were hoping that he'd bring a sense of stability out of a chaotic city. Geneva established the constitution known as the ecclesiastical ordinances. The word ecclesiastical means religious or religious leaders. The ecclesiastical ordinances are, this constitution is going to be based on religious teachings. And the ecclesiastical ordinances created a city of the elect. There was a strict moral code. You couldn't play music, you couldn't have art, you couldn't play games, you couldn't read fiction novels. There was no dancing, no holidays. There was nothing for leisure time activities. They believed if you participated in these leisure time activities, you were not part of the elect. And we'll see how they do it. So again, a strict moral code. If you were caught cussing or playing music or playing a game, the punishments could include being put in the stocks. The stocks is where you put your head and arms or legs into the block of wood, and you're stuck in the middle of the city. And the little children would then come by and make fun of you. They would shame you. And the whole purpose of the stocks was to be shamed into be returning back to the elect, to shame you away from your sin. If you continued the same sin, you might be excommunicated or kicked out of the city. Remember, excommunication, even though it's a religious thing, because this is a theocracy, you could be excluded from the city. And if you were really bad, you could be executed for your heretical thoughts. The whole purpose of life was to serve God. You go to work, you come home and worship God. Work and serve, worship God. Work and worship God. That is what it was meant to be a good Christian, a good member of the elect. There's not tolerant of the Protestant faiths. There was a guy named Michael Servetus who was an anti-Trinitarian. An anti-Trinitarian, he rejected the divinity of Christ. And he fled from Spain, hoping that maybe he could find protection in Calvin's Geneva. He was welcomed with a Genevan barbecue. He was burned at the stake. So I just want to point out This is not about tolerance. This is about a singular accepted faith. I do think this is important because it helps you understand the spread. John Knox, who was a Scottish reformer, came to Geneva, and what did he say? Dr. Spielvogel told us that he called Geneva the most perfect school of Christ on earth. John Knox believed this was the right way to be. So John Knox, who observed Geneva, he went back to Scotland teaching the ideas of Calvin. John Knox became the leader of the Church of the Scottish Church and transformed it into a Calvinist church, and that's where we get the word Presbyterian from. So again, we begin to see that really important. Calvin's Geneva became really a center of economic development, a center for Protestant faith, and sometimes we call it a city upon a hill. It was meant for everyone to see the good teachings of Jesus. Where did Calvinism spread and why? Well, it's Calvinism, as you see in this book, it spread from Switzerland to France, the Netherlands, Poland, Scotland, England, and eventually the Americas. I'm not sure why this map doesn't have it go to Poland. I promise you it did, but it also spread to the German states, even though it was excluded by the Peace of Augsburg. Why did it spread? Well, one of the reasons that it spread was because the merchants loved it. The merchants, and really for me, it's really this area here, the Netherlands. The Netherlands were the center of the Hanseatic League. They had prospered economically. And the merchants are like, why are we so good? And they're like, oh my God, we're good because we're part of the elect. They embrace the well-organized ideas of the systematic faith, but they loved the Protestant work ethic. Because merchants work really hard for their money, so of course they would be naturally part of the elect. I think that's a really important element for our conversation as we're trying to shift the paradigm. If the merchants are part of the elect, they should most likely be the top of the society. We'll see how that plays out. But that's where we're seeing it. So where and why did Calvinism spread? For me as a historian, it's really driven by the merchants. It's the Dutch, it's the French, it's the English, it's the Scottish. They want to prove to the world that they're worthy of their position. So as we conclude here, we know the spread of Protestant forever changed Christendom. We see this map again. We see where the Lutherans are in green. We see Calvinists as it spreads in purple. And we see England there as pink. That's the Anglican Church or the Anglican tradition or the Church of England. We know that after the Marburg Colloquy, Protestants define themselves by their differences, preventing a united Protestant religion. It's the reason why today, if you drive down the street, you'll see 30 different churches of faith. So really important there. So how was Northern Germany transformed by the Protestant Reformation? Clearly, it was transformed politically and religiously, as well as economically through this shift. The Protestant Reformation gave value to the merchants, especially in the Calvinist tradition. It created the foundation of the nation state, such as for the nation state of England. And we know religiously, the Pope has lost significant authority. And really, that brings us to an end of our lecture here. I hope that makes sense. I will be here before the quiz tomorrow to answer questions. So y'all have a great day.